Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank the conference for having me here. My name is Nisa, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about how journalists use data in their reporting. I hope you enjoy the Lois Lane reference. Um, so a little bit about me is that my name is Nisa Khan. I am the data journalist here at Michigan Radio for NPR. We're the largest NPR station in Michigan, proudly serving this great state. We're located in Ann Arbor, but we got offices in Detroit, Grand Rapids, Flint, and we just, I'm talking about my coworkers, but some of the best investigations I've ever seen. So I interned with them. I currently work as their data reporter. I did my bachelor's here at University of Michigan, but I did data journalism at Stanford and was able to really learn from the great data team they have there, and they're really emphasis on local news and gathering data for a local journalist, because sometimes data is great for national, maybe national and federal data, but when it comes to local, it's a little harder to do investigations. So I was able to learn a lot about how to do local investigations at Stanford. I did some research at ProPublica, and one of the stories I have kind of displayed here was helping gather addresses and data for shelters that are holding unaccompanied minors in 2018. And it was kind of one of those resources, and this will be like a running theme throughout this presentation, was trying to make kind of like jumping on a breaking news story and trying to make tools that are, and make it publicly transparent to audiences that are interested in, and seeing and tracking where maybe children were going during that time. And I also did a kind of a stint at the Detroit Free Press, a lot of COVID data, so a lot of jumping on vaccine trends, trying to battle misinformation that was kind of running rampant during that time, and using data to really make people understand the pandemic in such an uncertain time. Also, if I'm talking quick, just let me know. So I wanted to start off with the stories that kind of inspired me personally as a data journalist. And I know this is going to seem a little bit more humorous, but I do think that this is a culture interest story that uses data to back up people's everyday experiences. So this is from 2018, so when I was in college and just starting off as a data journalist. And this incredible data journalist website called The Pudding saw that Rihanna, the singer, had this new beauty brand called Fenty. And Fenty kind of promoted themselves as being the most inclusive beauty brand for giving more foundation shades of women with deeper skin tones. And this website wanted to kind of use data to see if other makeup brands were maybe exclusive towards women with deeper skin tones, and seeing if they didn't have a variety of shades. And the way they did is that they used data and kind of attributed range to actual colors of makeup shades to kind of prove that, yes, it seemed like her claims were correct, and that showing that a lot of makeup brands weren't showing a variety of shades, especially towards darker skin tones. And I just thought that this was kind of what kind of got me into this, and I think is one of those things that we're going to see in other things I show, that it was taking what people are talking about and really trying to back up with data, and and that's I think what I try to do a lot as journalists, is that taking everyday anecdotes and everyday experiences and trying to find the bigger trend here. Other stories is that this was from 2022. I just love this story so much, and it's another way of creating a new data set to be able to back up people's everyday experiences. So this is local human interest. This was from the New York Times in the past year, in 2022, where they were seeing that a lot of signs in Manhattan were kind of just more English, and when there used to be a much more diverse, used to have Chinese characters on them. But it kind of says that they're kind of disappearing. And what they did was really incredible. I would really encourage you to check out their article on Open News Source, where they told the entire process of how they tracked down these signs and were able to compare it to different years. They looked at Google Maps. They took screenshots. They walked, which as data journalists, we don't go out more and we don't really talk to people as much. So I really love that they went around and were able to look around and physically take pictures of the signs. They went into archives of Asian museums and looked at old reels and really try to track this down. And this is just the stuff I love. If I had $1 million for a budget, I'd be doing this too, of just being able to sort of do these hyper-local investigations in Michigan and things about the culture and the communities here. And yeah, I think again, it's just another thread of using data to back up anecdotes, what people were seeing, and kind of creating a data set that wasn't there before. And I think data journalists do that a lot. I'm probably not going to talk about this, but I also love this Washington Post thing. So if you ever have time, this is a simulator for climate change. So it's They made up a fake town, and they're like, if there's no other climate disasters in this town, but just extreme heat, what would happen? And it's just calamity. It's just like the streets melt, your car will melt. And I just thought it was a really great example of using models and kind of using just really great piece of explanatory journalism, which is also another favorite of mine, and just making these climate change and all these kind of big concepts applicable to people's everyday life. And that's what we're kind of just trying to do every day, which I'm sure you guys too, as data experts yourselves. And this one is like just a pivotal data investigation that I think just, they always list you at my J school, at undergrad, like this is the data investigation I always hear about. And it's a pivotal one that kind of really inspired me to get into this was the Sun Sentinel, which is in Florida, in 2012. They won a Pulitzer for this. And it is an amazing accountability piece on how anecdotally people knew that they noticing that some off-duty police cars were speeding a lot on highways, on streets, and it was just something that people knew about a lot. These journalists sort of went out of the way to sort of create a data set to see if that was true, if the cops were speeding off-duty without kind of the light flashing on top, siren, that's the word. They were kind of using like a speedometer, they were kind of measuring themselves. They were checking the methodology with professors, and they kind of created that data set themselves. They talked to families who really tragically got into accidents, and maybe their children were paralyzed or they got into accidents and just had health problems for the rest of their lives. And it's just another way of them going out to create the data sets that weren't there before. This had really, sort of really changed my life, I think, when I first read this, and it's something I think about a lot of just like, when there's something not there, you kind of have to go out and find it, and you have to kind of go out there for accountability to find disparities. And yeah, it's just an incredible piece of journalism. I know it's from 2012, but it's still out there on the Pulitzer Prize website. I don't know if the Sun Sentinel is working as much. But again, it's another experience of people are talking about it. How do we jump on what people are talking at and confirm or push back on the beliefs that they have? So a little about some of the work I'm doing, and kind of telling you about how some of the investigations we have done here on Michigan Radio, is that this is about PPP loans in 2021. So that's actually, oh my gosh, 2 years ago. Time is going by fast. And we worked with a nonprofit newsroom, Reveal, which is a national organization that just does a really great work with like gathering local data nationally, but really connecting with other local newsrooms to make sure that we're also being able to replicate their work and see if the same problems that are happening in like New York or California are happening in Michigan or Chicago, Illinois. And then, so we use the data for PPP loans. So Revealed with other news organizations, I think it was like, I want to say 12, it was a lot of news organizations, they actually sued to get this data on PPP loans. And PPP loans, as you know, are for small businesses that were struggling during the pandemic. And having small businesses that are flourishing are really important for communities, right? They help generate wealth, they help keep communities thriving. And the idea they wanted to see is that what communities or neighborhoods were maybe not getting PPP loans, were there higher rates of loans being denied? And the problem is that the government didn't calculate these loans by race. So we were not able to see racial disparities by, the actual small business owners. But what they did is that they didn't calculate it by race, so they calculated by the majority of race in census tracts. So each of these maps, are kind of census tracts in the Metro Detroit area, which is the only area we could have done because that's when we had the most significant amount of people there. We also had some in Grand Rapids, but it didn't exactly work out. But we were able to so here it is breaking by race. So orange is where all race tracts are majority white. Blue is where there's majority black residents. Green is majority Latino residents. And I think there's like an off shade where there's majority Asian residents. And we were able to compare that. And then if you hover over it, you're able to see how many loans were either accepted, denied, how many businesses there were, how many people applied, and calculate a rate over here, which is this map over here. And we were able to talk to Reveal and work out that many Latino census tracts are not totally neighborhoods, but that is like majority of Southwest Detroit, right? So we were able to sort of say in our headline and kind of go out and realize that a lot of like Latino business owners were having a hard time kind of getting a hold secure of these PPP loans. And that was something we were able to do with Reveal. And we did talk about, significance and like making sure that we did throw out some census tracts that maybe did not have a lot of like businesses that applied, and maybe not a lot of, people in the area. So we were able to clean out the data and kind of come up with this. And this was the story that we're really glad we were partnering up with like a national organization and get some data that as a smaller newsroom, we might not have the chance to. So we're very grateful for Reveal for that. This one is another one from 2021. So we wanted to answer a question that we saw popping up a lot in discussion on social media between people, which is after the George Floyd protests of 2020, there's a lot of interest in sort of finding ways to use funds that may traditionally go to police, to go to schools, to go to parks, to go to a lot of other fundings. And we wanted to see if, we wanted to sort of make it transparent of how city councils, we wanted to make the process of city council funding more transparent to the public. As a reporter and as somebody who dedicates themselves to this process for months, not that long, but for a really long time, it's a really complicated process. If you spend maybe a day looking at your city and your municipality and try to figure out how they do their budgets, it blew my mind. There's general funds, there's expenditures, there's this pot, there's a grant over here. And we were just having, we were just surprised by how complicated it was, and we wanted to make that transparent to the audience and to know how their city council is making these decisions. And we also wanted to confirm or debunk what people are talking about. I think there's an often talking point about how maybe police funding had went down, but we actually found that most municipalities kind of went up. Flint's was unrelated, and these are not exactly comparable, but we wanted to make sure that these are just kind of comparable to the actual city, so it's just from their own previous fiscal year. And we talked to professors about methodology, and we were just really, really diligent at fact-checking here and making sure that we were doing this responsibly. And I think that's one thing I really want to emphasize at this point is that, especially with investigations, journalists are really, really going to dive into the weeds and make sure they understand every aspect, especially for non-technical people. I do data journalism, but I wouldn't call myself the best statistician in the world, which maybe I'm a little embarrassed to say in front of you all. But I just really talking to professors about methodology. The University of Michigan I go to, Wayne State, MSU, those people have been really nice about lending their time and be able to talk to about this. But it's all kind of in the pursuit of making sure that we're being as responsible as we can with this information. This one is from 2023, so a little bit more recent. This was after the tragedy at Michigan State University, and we spent a lot of time creating a tracker, which was showing how many mass shootings have there been in Michigan. And a mass shooting is defined by 4 or more people who have been injured or killed in a shooting, and not including the actual gunman. And we wanted to find a way to bring an accountability piece and use data this way. So my colleague and I, Brad, had created this tracker that automatically updates each morning to kind of track legislation in the Michigan and what's happening in Lansing, and track this every day. We're tracking by who's sponsoring it, how's it on party lines, when it was last updated, and where it is. And I thought this was just another way of creating tools and applications for audiences, just something that they can go back to every day. This was really big during the pandemic too, right? Creating tools that people can go back to every day and see how their community were doing. What was the infection rate? Can I go out without a mask? Should I be masking up when I go to Kroger's? And I think we wanted to do something here and kind of take the lessons I learned from the pandemic and apply it to more to other topics that people are interested in, and I think this is just something that people really wanted to know. So yeah, that's on GitHub, and it's just something that updates a lot, and it's just another example of how smaller newsrooms are becoming a little bit more technically advanced, right? We are trying to do more exciting things when it comes to mapping and when it comes to making apps, and that makes me very excited as a local newsroom person. And yeah, sometimes data is not the whole story. So the University of Michigan did this really interesting research paper. This was from the Poverty Solutions Lab from Alexa Eisenberg, where almost 9 in 10 Detroit eviction cases were from properties that were not up to rental code, meaning that people were being evicted, were getting threatened with eviction in Detroit from places that were not even safe to begin with, meaning that there's some onus on the landlord as well. And safety codes have been around in Detroit, but not a lot of it up to them. That includes freezing pipes, no water, leaky roof. So we had this information, but a lot of outlets have covered it because they're quicker than me. And I'll say that's the thing. Maybe I should be a little bit faster when it comes to breaking news. But we had this research, and we were trying to figure out how do we try to make this useful? How do we try to take this information? And I think the thing is that like sometimes as journalists, I want to make sure, how do I make information useful for people's everyday lives? Because telling this could be kind of dismaying, right? So we were trying to think about a way, like what is the way we can kind of give agency back into the situation? So we kind of came up with like kind of this guide and story about your rights as a renter and try to create like a sort of how-to on like, if you have a dispute with your landlord, you can escrow your money, and this is applicable to you guys too if you ever have this problem, if you're renting, is that you can like withhold your money and put it into a bank account and duke it out with your landlord and be like, I'm not paying until you make this fix. You can deduct and pay, where you can fix it yourself and reduce from your rent. And these are all risky things, and we try to like, connecting people to lawyers and connect people to nonprofits that may be able to help you if you're a low income and live in the city. And just another thing, the way my team tries to do is that we do try to take data and data analysis and find out the ways that we can help people in their everyday lives and try to how to navigate complex systems when the system just feels kind of overwhelming.
Wait, before you go.
Yeah, sure.
The title says 9 and 10. But only
Almost 9 to 10.
Almost 9 and 10.
Yeah. Yeah, good catch. Yeah, I should have said that. If for the video, it's almost 9 and 10.
Why didn't you just say 8? Because you have 8 colors.
There's a little bit of white over there.
That's the 8th house.
I think it was just really good for the headline. That's an editor thing. What did he says? Anyway, so here's the Amplify team, where that's a team I'm part of in Michigan Radio, where I'll read our mission statement for you a little bit. The Amplify team's goal is to connect people living in Michigan with the resources and information they need to thrive. Our reporting, how-to guides, and community events will help you become your own best advocate on basic needs like housing, public safety, health, and more. So what we do is that we try to do a lot of events. These are really beautiful pictures. And we try to bring our reporting to the people in the community every day. If you see one, please come out. For example, my coworker actually used the data viz I made and try to bring them to life. So for example, we were doing a story about pretrial detention in Detroit and people who have been held in jail for long periods of time. And she actually put all the costs we made in a huge jar to show how much it costs to call people into jail. And it's quite expensive over time, just to show them how long the bill we racked up and show the expenses of calling people in jail. Another thing is that these phones, where when you pick them up, they had a soundbite from someone in jail, so kind of showing that what we were doing online and trying to transfer it for in real life, and sort of bring these stories to people and try to really engage with people on some of the investigations we were doing. We also did a housing forum in Detroit too about all the resources and all the profits and organizations that help people try to be homeowners, renting problems, and things like that. So that's kind of the stuff we do at Amplify, is trying to think of a different way. So this is how we sort of plan on and prioritize the stories, which is a little bit of the crux of this workshop, was breaking down how we prioritize our beats. So these are like the everyday needs, right? Food, water, housing, things you need in your everyday life to survive and thrive in your community. Public safety, wages and economy, democracy, also an important one. It shouldn't be as empty as it is. This was probably from the beginning. And the way that me and my coworker planned this is that data was kind of our North Star. We were using data to kind of plant us and feel like, where are we in Michigan in context? Where are we in Michigan and like kind of versus the world, versus the Midwest, versus the rest of the country, and seeing how we and seeing what was out there. So we actually made a huge spreadsheet of just like every single data set there is out there related to Michigan, related to all these beats, and what was there sitting out there, and how we can use that in our future stories. So data's to become a really big part of how we do our work and how we try to move forward, and what our other outlets may not be covering, and what can we kind of jump in and see, like, and see what are maybe some stories that are not being covered as much in Michigan, in Metro Detroit. So this is a part where I kind of wanted to point out, like, what are some journalists looking for in data jobs? What are some maybe like pet peeves they have? What are some things that they're hoping to see when they're kind of talking to data professionals, whether it's like a government official, whether it's somebody who's trying to hope to create a dashboard that could be used by journalists. So if you have an interest in creating a product that maybe the media can use, I kind of gathered all these like tips from my coworkers, from other journalists on different Slack groups that I was in, and just seeing like what are people really like, and I'm sure these are probably pet peeves you share too, because we're all kind of running into this. The big one is that everyone really likes a CSV download. I think a lot of journalists probably won't publish a story without looking at the raw data itself. They like kind of creating their own graphics. I think it's mostly sometimes because it works well with their CMS, if their own website probably has their own style guide. So if they really like their bar charts to be blue, something like that, they might just create it themselves instead of taking a screenshot. It's picky like that. But yeah, having it, yes, even if you have a Tableau or the Microsoft Power BI, a CSV download would be a crucial thing to have. Also, let me see how much time I have. If I'm talking too quickly, I'll slow down. I have until 12:15, okay. Yeah, also, I think if a newsroom has a data person, they would love to talk to another data person. And don't be shy when a journalist reaches out to you. Just go full forth in getting to all the technical stuff and answering the questions. And I will say, like, I'm never going to be as smart as maybe the data person behind there, but really just tell me all the details, and it helps kind of save some time too, right? We might going right to the PR person, and the PR person may not know everything, so we might publish something that's incorrect, and then we'll have to kind of do a retraction. And I think it just saves some time to be able to reach out directly to the data person. I clear data dictionary and methodology too, just being able to know what your definitions are, what each column means. I did a lot of stuff with the opioid data, which is I'm not as familiar with, and there wasn't a data dictionary, and it took a lot of back and forth with a communications person. And yeah, it's stuff like that is always very important, especially when it comes to health. Oddly formatted Excel sheets, you probably all know this too, so it just makes it very hard so like a lot of like merged headers, like that really big one with statistics. This was from Social Explorer for census data, and I had to do this for a renting story, and I had to there's probably a smarter way to do this, but I couldn't figure it out, so I had to kind of manually just finagle with this. So yeah, using any data portals you have and just kind of having a plain, boring looking Excel sheet is actually quite great. Have collection standards change over time, have measurements changed, have the way you've done your work change from maybe previous years, and maybe like something that we need to mark in a graphic. If it's data part of a time series, having all that data kind of in the same place. Having FIPS codes with county data, so like a lot of making a location, geographic location data available. A lot of some government websites have maps available, but they won't have like the back end of showing you what the data is going into it. So sometimes we have to actually go and compare to another sheet with zip codes and do the work ourselves. And just being as transparent as possible with like just showing the raw data behind it. Also, what are the limitations? What are the categories that are missing? What are some things that you'd be worried about a journalist misinterpreting, and maybe even adding it on top of there too? This I thought could be really useful during like the pandemic. I always thought that the Michigan Health Department should have written like, remember to not write, when you have like a percent increase, remember to write like percentage point increase instead of percent increase. I think that was a big problem that a lot of journalists jumped into at the beginning of the pandemic when talking about like positivity rates. And yeah, I think it's just one of those kind of little things where like it's important for us because we all have an idea of this, but it's just making sure we're being transparent to the audience, even in these little technical things. Also API documentation, if the newsroom is getting there. And yeah, I just think one thing about journalists, and I'm sure as you too, is that we love just tools that increase information to the public and increase public access. So what I'm showing you here is a website that is still in beta, but you can check it out. It's searchminutes.com. It's created by Dustin, who's our Grand Rapids reporter, and Brad, who's kind of our digital specialist communication man. He's incredibly smart. And they coded this website that they're still kind of developing, is where when you search for something in this bar, you can actually find out where it comes up in a city council meeting. And it's a way to, as local papers are shutting down over time, I think just even national ones, BuzzFeed went down a couple of days ago, unfortunately. It's just as local papers are shutting down, there's less eyes on city council, there's less eyes on maybe your school board, and finding out what are the decisions made at your municipality. And what this tool aims to do is make it easy for journalists, but also just the public see what they're talking about. When was the last time they talked about budgeting for schools or water issues? I did a story about rent control, which is actually banned in Michigan since the 80s, and I was really interested in seeing if that was something people were talking about a lot, if that was something that people were like, my rents shot up by like 20%, what can we do about it? So this is an example of me like just putting a rent and showing it showed up in Detroit, East Lansing, Flint, but that's also how I talked to someone from Mackinac. So I actually talked to a person who is from Traverse City, and I talked to someone from Traverse City, but I also talked to someone from Mackinac, and then being able to hear about the experiences. And we don't really cover the UP as much as we do Metro Detroit, and I think it was just a great tool to connect with someone and see that this is an issue happening statewide, and it really is a great connector. So I want to do a minutes plug, but it's also a great another piece of like data journalism. It's a little bit more of the programming side, but it is gathering information and trying to make it more accessible. I also want to take this moment of like dashboards I use in Michigan a lot that I just think are really incredible. I don't know if those people will ever be here, if you know them. I use water-led data. I spelled lead right. Yeah, okay, I spelled lead right. Water-led data I use a lot, especially after Flint and Benton Harbor, and after those tragedies. This is just something we keep our eyes out a lot for. So like my co-reporter, my editor actually, Lindsay Smith, does a lot of follow-ups on like just making sure what is happening in Benton Harbor, how are their leads working, because in Michigan that stuff is really, really accessible and like well updated. So that's something I keep out an eye on a lot, and just like what is happening with water in Michigan. There used to be a 211 BOR. So a 211 call, in case you don't know, is what you call for like a helpline if you need food assistance, if you need rent assistance, gas assistance. So it's basically a helpline. There used to be a really, really useful 211 dashboard at the beginning of the pandemic. Allergies. And it used to be able to tell what are people's biggest needs during the pandemic. And it was really helpful for priority setting, being like, people are really asking about food. Let's try to jump on a food story. And I don't know if it's any active anymore. So if anyone knows the 211 guy, let him know that I miss them. Or maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is still active. And then COVID, this is a really weird one, but we really liked using the Kent County dashboard almost a little bit more than the state one. And I do think that maybe it is useful as journalists, as people who are not really jumping into the data and like, doing the whole thing. My editor, she's an incredibly smart woman, but she's not as like a programmer, and she's not a big statistician. So the Kent County dashboard was a really great way for her to glance at the data and see what the infection rates were. And it was just such a thorough, incredible source. So if anyone knows anyone from Kent County and what they did, it was a really great dashboard. And I think it was one of the best county dashboards I've seen like nationwide, honestly. So it's just a really great, powerful tool. It was like 8 pages long too. It was also in a Microsoft thing, so it didn't have a CSV, but it was just a really great way to scan over and see what the highlights were. I also used the UMich disparities tracker too for COVID. Which I think that's one thing journalists like, is having something to glance at and be like, what are the major hotspots and what is the story of the day? And being able to push that to the top. So this actually happened yesterday. So I kind of, not only was I kind of looked into this, so I haven't been able to really fully process this yet, but this is the Michigan court's data caseload. And it's just another really great example of increased transparency in Michigan, especially with our court system. I've always wanted to know what is happening, and I feel like I talk a lot about housing, but also a lot of like investigations and that involve the court, and I just didn't really know where to start. So they released this kind of out of the nowhere earlier this week, and maybe they were planning on it. It's part of their strategic plan, so I'm sure they were planning on it. It's a little overwhelming, but I think it's just one of these things that I think like, if a journalist sees, and I'm sure you too, it's broken down by county, it's broken by like largest county. It's also very overwhelming, I'm sure, as you can see too. It probably will take a long time to find a story here, but it's just another way of being able to find trends for any stories that you're trying to jump on. And yeah, sometimes the data comes afterwards. So this is kind of a little bit of a reason why I'm here, is that I was actually talking to someone who did the Wayne County Jail Board, and he kind of brought me in here to fill in for someone else. But my co-reporter and I, Binish Ahmed, did a story about people held in Wayne County Jail for long periods of time pre-trial. So for a little background, is that a task force in Michigan says that if people are held for longer than 18 months, that is kind of denying people's right to a quick and speedy trial. So that's considered too long for a quick and speedy trial. So people are held and of course we have innocence until proven guilty in America. So people are held in jail for really long periods of time, and we wanted to talk to people specifically who would be held in long periods of time during the pandemic. During the pandemic, just the infection rates, the way that infection spreads in jail just would have been, it's a terrible situation because there's really close quarters, not a lot of time to go outside, not a lot of ventilation. So we really wanted to talk to people in this situation. So we found a bunch of people to talk to, over 100, who have been in pretrial detention. We are able to really use the data to humanize their stories, right? To put their faces and their names and their voices. So if you click on the circles, you can hear their name shows up, their voices shows up. We get to hear a soundbite from them in the interviews we did with them, and really try to find the numbers but connect them to people's faces. And I think one thing is that data is always going to be part of the bigger context, but it probably will never be the front thing, because as a reader, you care more about the people, right? And I think people have known that people have been held in pretrial for detention, especially during the pandemic, for a really long time. We just wanted to find the scope and try to validate people's experiences, or maybe try to see if those were true and try to see how big was that problem. So we talked to people here, and then a couple of months, the Wayne County Jail dashboard came out, and it actually had all of this data. So what I did was that I actually scraped this data from the Wayne County website using Python, and we just spent months and weeks cleaning out, just making sure we were being 100% in saying, have people been in there for 18 months consecutively? Have people been, have people been kind of in and out? Have people maybe been resentenced or something, or anything like that? And just a lot of work to kind of find these people and reach out to them. And we also did a survey about COVID. And then a couple months later, Wayne County just had all this information. So it is a little bit of a thing of we all have kind of the same priorities, right? We all want to make this information transparent to the public. We all want to make sure that their families know this information, that the people themselves know this information. And it was just kind of, and we were able to do a follow-up article about it and use their data too. But it was just kind of a situation of creating this data themselves and getting itself by the county government. And I think it's always good to get it from the county when they kind of make that a priority to hand it out to people. And yeah, here's my own personal interest. And I thought this would be, okay, cool. A couple minutes. So this is my own personal interest, and I'm doing a call out here. I thought this would be the greatest place to do it. I'm really interested in rent data, and if anyone knows a good place for rent data, I am out here asking you about it. So these graphs are from Austin, which is not in Michigan, but this is just a really excellent piece on how rent data, we all really don't know the price of rent, especially in major cities. So reading out the headline here is $1,700, $2,900, $3,200 a month. What is the real cost of rent in Austin? And I wanted to do a story about rent control, but I was just having a really hard time nailing down what was a reliable source of rent in Detroit, Ann Arbor, Ypsi. And what this radio reporter at KUT had the same problem, right? People were on social media and talking, they're like, every headline just seemed to be a different number for each month. But they were all from different sources, right? From Zillow, Rent Cafe, the American Community Survey. So what they did is that they compare them all, and it's a huge jump, right? These are not in the same range. And what they concluded in this article was that there should be some kind of organization, whether it is from the government, whether it is from a nonprofit, doing a survey of landlords. Because Zillow and Rent Cafe, they don't really get mom and pop landlords. They don't really get, the smaller places that might be a little bit skewed, a little bit cheaper. They tend to go a little bit more corporate stuff, which as far more corporations buy up a lot more places, that might become the norm. But I think it's just something that I really care about and I'm very passionate about. And it's important because I think it also just again, as everyone in this room knows, the accurate data is important. And I think if anecdotally we all know people are feeling the strain of rent, if they're feeling pressure, but it's actually not 32,000, 1,700. Maybe a lay person could be like, oh, well, that's not so bad, but people are still feeling the strain. So that's why I do think is having the correct data is important, because we need the number to back up of what is the strain that people are feeling. And it could be the quote unquote lower number. That's still a lot of money to me, but I'm just saying that it's important to have the right number there and to put the number to the experiences that we know people are feeling. The rent is very expensive in Austin, in Detroit, in Ypsi, and definitely Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids. But yeah, I thought this would be the perfect place to get this rant out. The American Community Survey I used a lot in my last story, but the American Community Survey kind of lags behind a while, so it's not quite updated from year to year, and it always tends to be a little bit lower. And that's another case where I think if we go too low, we're not really getting, again, what people are strain of people are feeling. I really like their measure of so the American Community Survey has a really great measure, which is people who are rent burdened or cost burdened. That is when people are paying more than 30% of their paycheck on rent and utilities. I'm sure whenever I say that number, the immediate reaction people say is I'm definitely paying more than 30% on rent and utilities. But that is actually the kind of federal standard. And I use that a lot in my rent control story. And I think it was just a really good way to immediately put into people's head that people are paying a lot of rent, 50% or more in Grand Rapids, in Lansing, in major cities. And I really enjoy that measure, but I think just having the actual number, wherever that may be, whoever wants to do the survey. And also here's a really good later reading from the Urban Institute. So there's that. Thank you so much for listening, and I really appreciate your time. And I guess if there's any questions for me, I'm right here. Oh, thanks.
So I understand that there's layoffs that just happened at NPR, so maybe you just don't have the staff to do this, but have you considered with your team, I'm gonna shut that off. Have you considered with your team the possibility of going out and collecting some of this data yourself?
That's an excellent question. So also to let you a little bit know, so NPR, there's NPR in national, we're an NPR station, so we work with NPR a lot and we do feed stories into them. For example, our recent abortion story would be also considered an NPR story that talked about if you're doing coverage here, if you're doing elections, it feeds into NPR too. So luckily, cross fingers, we weren't affected by the NPR layoffs. They had so many great data journalists that were unfortunately laid off. And I think they're just the best people in the world. But for us, so in our current team, it's just me as a data reporter. I'm the only full-time data reporter there. And there is a bit of a juggling in priorities there, right? What can I do for day-to-day? During the pandemic, unfortunately, some investigations did go on the wayside because I had to jump on the pandemic, getting the quick news about schools, about, vaccination things. So yeah, one of my biggest interests is doing a really long-term data collection story. A lot of it is also getting a little bit of, is the priority setting. So luckily I've been put onto a long-term investigative team, and we are kind of trying to do something with vacancies, especially in Detroit, and trying to see what can be the most useful for people. So that's some of my biggest interests, is doing something a little bit more like gumshoe, doing some door knocking and stuff like that, and doing something creative. But a lot of it is also what do people need at certain times, also on top of our head. But yeah, I appreciate your question.